Today we're gonna be starting this massive buffet. It could be used as buffet or a dresser. In this case, it's going in one of our family friends' dining rooms, so they're gonna be using it as a buffet. I think I got it for $120 if I remember correctly off Facebook Marketplace. It is in really, really bad condition. It's gonna need a ton of work. It's gonna need a ton of wood filler. It is super dirty. It was sitting in somebody's garage for like years. So we're gonna go ahead and get started on this piece. Something like this usually will take me working on and off on it for probably about a week or so. However, I only work when my daughter is asleep or if she's at like preschool in the mornings or during her nap times, bedtimes. My husband has her. So my schedule, I kind of pop in and out of the garage whenever I can. I also am 23 weeks pregnant and I don't quite have the energy levels to be out in the garage for like 6 hours a day at a time. So this whole video will be over the course of about a week. So just to give you a little bit of a time frame reference on how long something like this will take. But again, it needs a lot of work. So that's what we're gonna get started on. The plan for this piece is to paint it, the whole thing, add new knobs, and just kind of bring it back to life. Let's get started. The first thing we're gonna do is clean it, and I like to use Crud Cutter. It's a degreaser. We also use it in our kitchen, and it just helps to remove all the gunk and grime that's on your piece without leaving a residue behind. And that is off of just like a couple swipes, which is why you always clean it. So after we clean it, we're actually gonna scuff sand it to give the primer something better to grip onto. And one of the questions I always get asked is, why do you even clean it if you're just gonna go right in and sand it? And basically, when you have a piece that's super dirty and has a lot of grime built up on it like this piece does, when you're sanding, all that grime and dirt is just gonna build up on to your sandpaper. You're actually just gonna waste sandpaper because it's gonna build up on there. You're not gonna get good contact with the wood, so you're gonna go through sandpaper quicker and just waste a lot of it. So that's just a good way to cut down on your sanding time and also avoid wasting materials that you don't need to waste. Another thing I like to do if a piece has a lot of details and is very, very dirty, I will either take it outside and spray it down and then dump some Crud Cutter concentrate into a bucket and scrub it down. In this case, it is so cold outside, so I just sprayed it all over. I'm gonna let it sit for a little bit and then I'm gonna go in and scrub it all to get into all the details and make sure that there's no dirt and dust trapped under the paint. And now I'm just taking the doors off so that it makes it a little bit easier to clean and also to sand down. Now that everything is cleaned off, all the gunk and grime is scrubbed off, and now we're gonna go into sanding, and we're gonna scuff sand, which is basically just lightly sanding to get rid of any minor nicks and dents, and also to kind of rough up the surface a little bit to give the primer something better to stick to. For this piece, I'm only gonna use 220 grit sandpaper because I don't wanna rough it up too much. Since we are gonna paint, I wanna keep it a smooth surface, but I just wanna scuff it up a little bit and get rid of some of the nicks and dents. I really just wanna smooth everything out that I can, so we're not gonna go any lower than 220 today. I'm using my Surf Prep sander, which is the 3" by 4" electric ray, so it just plugs right up into an outlet, but I actually have it hooked up to a hose that connects into a shop vac. So with the little holes on it, it sucks up all the dust and goes right into the shop vac, which is super nice. It keeps my area a lot cleaner and it sucks up just all the dust and debris that comes off from sanding. If you don't have a Surf Prep, they are more expensive. Any budget-friendly orbital or just normal sander will work. And you can also buy adapters to hook them up to a normal shop vac hose to get the same concept. we have the entire thing sanded down and sanded smooth, we got rid of all of the surface level nicks and dents. This next part is definitely personal choice, but I am actually gonna go in, instead of taking the time to fill every single nick and dent that's all over this piece, I'm actually just gonna water down a ton of wood filler, put it on the entire thing, and it acts as a really cheap grain filler as well. This is just gonna give the entire piece a super smooth finish, make it look more factory-like finish, and fill in all the grain and everything so it just looks very professional when you go to lay the primer and the paint on. After the primer's on, I'll do another round of wood filler to get anything that's missed, but in my opinion, it's easier to just lather it all with grain filler and this wood filler before you prime. That way there's not much you have to do after you prime. So for this budget-friendly grain filler, I'm just grabbing plastic wood, and I'm actually gonna grab my container that's a little bit more dried out, so we're gonna use that up. I'll put a side by side so you can see the two. This one's a lot more dried, so we're gonna use it up with some warm water, a little chip brush, some just plastic utensils to stir everything up, and just kind of make a little homemade concoction, throw it on the dresser, cover the entire thing, and then the next part is gonna be a whole lot of sanding. And this part's obviously gonna be easier if you use newer wood filler or it's not as dried out, but again, I wanna use up this container and not use the container I just bought. That way it's smoother for when I go touch up the dents after the primer. I ended up transferring it back into the original container to get some of the leftover wood filler, and then I went in and grabbed a whisk because it was taking forever to break down, but you want it to be like a thinner pancake mix type texture. And while I'm brushing it on, you want to go against the wood grain. So if your grain is running this way, you want to brush it on the opposite way. That way you're not pulling it out of the wood grain. If you go along with the grain, you want it to be settling into the wood grain so that you have a super smooth finish. And as I get to sections that maybe have a little bit more dents, I know I'll probably have to go back in and do another round of fixing the dents after the primer when you can see them a little bit better. But I usually go in and try to lay this watered down filler a little bit thicker over those areas. That way it's still less you have to patch in the future. This step of adding this grain filler is extremely time consuming. A lot of people don't think it's worth it, but I do because I like to have that perfect finish on your piece when you're finished and not see a bunch of grain popping through. But especially on a piece like this that has a lot of detail along the front, you're gonna spend an extra probably 2 days sanding it all smooth, so just be prepared for that. It's not always necessary if you don't mind the grain or if that's the style you're going for, but I want this piece to look a lot more sleek and modern when I'm finished. So and at this point you're probably gonna think it looks like an absolute disaster, and it does, and that's okay, but don't forget you're going to go back in and lightly sand it all smooth. And the only thing that will be left is the wood filler that has settled into the grain so that when you add the primer, it'll be smooth. So just go with the flow, let it look a little crazy for 2 days, and it'll be worth it. My daughter just poked her head out here. She is 2.5 and realized I was out here doing the grain filling, which is one of her favorite things to do and to help me with. It's a super easy way for me to work while she's at home with me, but it's also non-toxic. If she gets it all over her, it washes off with water. So poured a little bit in a container, gave her a chip brush, and she is gonna start on the drawers. Good job. Okay. Good job, babe. And then hold it. Okay, I'm gonna go work over here, okay? Okay, You can do it right here.
I want to do it like that.
Remember, we only do it on the tops. Okay?
Dip it right there.
Okay. But dip it and put it on the top of it, okay?
But I want to dip.
I don't know if you guys ever, as a parent, like your kid just yells and you just yell back at them. Like, not yelling at them, but they're just like, ah, and so you just go, ah, like, and yell back at them. That's all I can hear inside the kitchen right now, which is right inside the door, is my toddler yelling and her dad just yelling back at her. So at this point, you're probably thinking I'm a little crazy, which is completely valid. I've never said that these are the only ways to do things. This is just what I like to do and what's worked for me the past few years. You don't have to do it, it is time consuming, but when it comes to DIY and furniture flipping, there are a million different ways to do things, and things that work for me may not work for other people, and things that I do on some pieces may not work for other pieces. So it truly is trial and error and just kind of figuring out what you like. But because it's cold out here, we put a pretty thick layer of wood filler on everything. I'm gonna let it dry out. I actually might let it dry out overnight just to make sure it gets super dry, and then we will go back in tomorrow and start very lightly sanding all of this wood filler off and getting it ready for a primer. So I did end up letting this all dry out overnight, and now I am back to grabbing my sander and 400 grit sandpaper. The key for when sanding off this wood filler is that you want to use a really high grit sandpaper, because if you use too low of a grit, then you're just going to pull off all of the wood filler, but also pull off the wood filler that soaked into the grain, which is what you were trying to fill in the first place. Sometimes I also like to add an interface pad, like a squishy sanding pad. That way it helps absorb some of the vibrations as well, and I can go over the piece even lighter. This is definitely one of the more time consuming parts because we're gonna lightly sand everything off. I use my sander for the big sections and the flat sections, and then I go back in and hand sand all of the details and the smaller sections that my sander might not be able to reach. So already you can see where I've sanded, but all of these tiny little areas that have the white specks is where the wood filler settled into the wood grain, and all of these would have been nicks and dents that I needed to fill had I not done the watered down wood filler. So I know you can't see a video, but it is so smooth to the touch, and it's gonna give a perfect finish for the primer to lay on. Now that we have the entire piece lightly sanded down, I went over and vacuumed it all off, and now you can really tell where the wood grain actually settled into all the nicks and dents, and it makes you realize how many more nicks and dents there were than you realize. So that saved me hours. One of the most underrated things you can do before priming or painting is to vacuum off all of the dust and then use a tack cloth. So these are just sticky cheesecloths, and you're just gonna take it and wipe down your entire entire piece, and it's gonna get all the tiny little debris and dust that's left over. That way it doesn't get trapped under your paint and you can't see it through your paint. So I keep packs of these on hand at all times, and they are perfect to just make sure that your piece is ready for paint and primer. So this is actually one of my favorite primers because it has some grain filler abilities, so it's gonna fill any leftover nicks and dents that might be super surface level, but it also has great adhesion, so it's gonna stick to the wood really well and lay a really, really pretty finish for your paint to go on top of. I also love using a spray can because there is little to no cleanup. You just throw it away after and you're not dealing with cleaning oil out of your paint sprayer. So after I primed it, I then went back on some of the bigger sections and grain filled again, lightly sanded all that off with 400 grit, and then sprayed it down with shellac to seal in all the primer and the wood filler. For this piece, I'm gonna use Fusion Mineral Paint. This is my favorite paint to use. It is specifically for furniture, has a built-in primer and top coat, but I always recommend doing both and priming and top coating just to be more careful. You can brush or roll this on. I'm gonna use my paint sprayer just to make sure we get a super fine and beautiful finish on this. I use the Home Rate Super Finish Max or the Wagner Flexio 5000 usually for spraying. If you want a tutorial on how to use a paint sprayer though, I do have a full tutorial over on my YouTube channel. I'll link it above as well. So now I'm gonna take my leftover paint from my paint sprayer, pour it back into the container so I can reuse it on another piece. And then I'm gonna leave a little bit of paint left in my paint sprayer and mix it in with my water-based polyurethane. This is gonna tint the polyurethane a little bit and just help the piece look overall blended and not have such a shiny coat on top. This trick of blending your leftover paint with your polyurethane is also great for darker colors because this is how you're gonna avoid getting streaks, whether you're spraying, rolling, brushing. Mixing them and tinting your polyurethane a little bit is gonna help blend it all together so you're not gonna be able to see the polyurethane streaks as much. The final step in this is to get all the doors put back on, all these handles added, and then we are finished. These are some of my favorite handles to use. They're from Amazon, but they're adjustable. So if you don't want to drill new holes or deal with drilling new holes, especially on raw wood pieces, these are amazing because the sides slide in and out and you don't have to drill holes and they just match whatever holes you have. And I'll add them to the list of everything I used on this makeover that was at the beginning of the video, and it's also down in the description as well. For
From where we started to where we are now, I cannot believe this is the same dresser. It ended up taking me on and off about 3 weeks, but again, I got sick, I'm pregnant, so this is definitely something you could do within a week. This piece challenged me a lot. But I'm so happy that it's finished. I love how it turned out, and I cannot wait to see it in our friend's dining room. You can find everything I used in this makeover down in the description below, and check out my YouTube channel for more full furniture flips.